among us the values of your kingdom, where truth reigns and justice is done. We put the intentions of our prayers into actions by the way we live. So, Lord God, what we know not, teach us. What we have not, give us. And what we are not, make us. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. This is the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, 27th February 2024, Tuesday, 11th of June 2024, Tuesday, 25th of June 2024, Tuesday, 2nd of July 2024, Tuesday, 9th of July 2024, Tuesday, 16th of July 2024, Tuesday, 23rd of July 2024, Tuesday, 30th of July 2024, Friday, 9th of August 2024, to be confirmed. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed.
Question that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed. Could we all stand for a minute silence in memory of A.M. Maisie Barkowitz, please?
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the President.
I'm in receipt of message dated 9th August 2024. Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform that I shall be away from office during the periods 11th to 22nd of August 2024 and 25th to 31st of August 2024 on vacation leave. In accordance with provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Douglas Gibson will perform the functions of the office of President during my absence. As the Honourable, the House of Assembly will not be meeting prior to the start of my vacation leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honourable, the House of Assembly, when next it meets? Yours faithfully, President. And also in receipt of message 4th of September 2024. Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform the Honourable House of Assembly that the President, Her Excellency, the Most Honourable Dame Sandra Mason, FB, GCMG, DASC, LLD, has extended her vacation leave from 1st to 7th September 2024. In accordance with the provisions of Section 33 of the Constitution, I have taken the necessary oaths to perform the functions of the office of the President during Her Excellency's absence. As the Honourable House of Assembly is not meeting at this time, it will not be possible for the usual formal message to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring the absence of Her Excellency formally to the attention of the Honourable House of Assembly when next it meets? Yours faithfully, Acting President.
Petitions, papers.
Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Tourism Development Amendment Bill 2024.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Madam Deputy Speaker, order number 6. In the name of the Honourable Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, to resume the debate on the passing of a resolution that the Parliament of Barbados take note of the 2023 to 2028 National Policy on Aging.
Good morning, honourable members. We wish to continue with the deliberations on order number 6, associated with the 2022 to 2023 policy on aging. Honourable member. Honourable Member for St. Michael North.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and let me first start by welcoming back yourself, Madam Deputy Speaker, His Honor, the Speaker as well, and all parliamentary colleagues after our summer recess. It is always a privilege to walk up these steps into this hallowed chamber, and I see it as an honor and a privilege to be here this morning to speak on this particular policy and resolution. Before I start, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was supposed to seek the permission and approval of His Honor the Speaker and now yourself in the chair, but yesterday I would have attended the funeral of one of, I think, Barbados's leading champions, in particular relative to dementia and Alzheimer's, but I would say a champion relative to care of the elderly in general. And as I'm speaking about her in a positive sense, Madam Deputy Speaker, I crave your indulgence. I speak of Miss Pamelia Brayton, who was the president, founder, one of the founders, and the president, long-serving president of the Barbados Alzheimer's Association. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would have met Pamelia several years ago in being a young man seeking to serve my country in many different ways. I've had occasion to work with varying organizations, service organizations, and I would have reached out to Pamelia after hearing a presentation on Alzheimer's several years ago, and I would have inquired as to how I can best serve and how I can help, how I can lend my hand in support of the mission of the association. I found from my very first interaction with her that she was one of the most pleasant people that I had the pleasure of meeting. She was warm, she was encouraging, she was a fountain of wisdom and knowledge. She was sharing of her experience. She was willing to share gladly, without reservation. And just from that initial interaction with her, I felt comfortable that this was an organization that I would want to align myself with and would want to put my service and my efforts behind. And so I joined, and I served, therefore, with Pamelia for many years. As I said, there's no other word that could be used to describe her other than champion of the cause. Many setbacks, many distractions, many disappointments. She faced them all, and she braved them with tremendous fortitude and with tremendous strength. And of course, I want to extend, I believe I can dare say on behalf of this entire House, our condolences, our sympathies to her loved ones, to her children, to all those who would have known her and loved her, and those who worked with her in the vineyard of elderly care. I believe that we have lost a champion, we have lost a stalwart, but I believe that the mission and the legacy will continue, and she has left a good wicket upon which we can all bat. So my condolences go out to all who knew and loved Miss Brayton. With that being said, I think it really ties in well with what we're discussing here today in terms of the national policy on aging. There's much that can be said relative to how our elderly, our older members of society are treated as productive, active members and contributing members of this land that we love called Barbados. The situation, Madam Deputy Speaker, is such that we have done an excellent job, not only Barbados, but across the world, in terms of preserving life. we have done a very phenomenal job, a stellar job of allowing people to live longer. This comes against a backdrop of times and periods in history where mortality amongst human beings was high. Persons were dying at very young ages. In fact, there are still some countries right now today in 2024 where the life expectancy is in its 30s. So we sometimes can take for granted the phenomenal work that has been done by successive administrations, governments here in Barbados that have enacted policies, that have enacted initiatives, that have taken courses of action, that have supported the ability of our people to live longer lives. Of course, that being the positive, the double side of that and the challenge that confronts us as a government, a progressive and forward-thinking government, a government that's looking down the road to 2050 and 2060 and 2100, is that we have to then think about how do we ensure that even as people do age and they live longer, that we ensure that they're living more active and healthy lives as they progress. And this is the challenge that is facing many organizations, from your multilateral organizations, from your various governments across the world. They're all tackling this balance between ensuring that we can provide a quality of care that allows our people to live longer, but also ensure that those services and that health care and that delivery of those services are such that persons can live better quality of life. Unfortunately, as you live longer, there is a tendency towards the acquisition of non-communicable diseases. As the old people will say, as long as you live, something will happen. And, I speak to people on a daily basis, constituents, whoever. You come into contact with the general public and you engage with them and, you ask somebody how they're doing and they say, all right, all but the knee, all but the arthritis, all but the this and all but the that. It is a natural part, typically, of the aging process that the body will become a little less robust. It may become a little more frail. It is a natural part of the aging process, but I dare say, and I challenge us to understand in government and as leaders in our various fields of endeavor, that Alzheimer's is not a must because you are aging. It's not guaranteed because you're aging that you will get dementia. NCDs are also not a must because you're aging. Aging and NCDs does not go hand in hand. It is not automatically correlated, I should say, and linked. These things we take for granted, and we oftentimes say to ourselves that because the person gets old that they will get diabetes or they will get hypertension. That is not necessarily the case. I believe the statistics show us that 1 in 5 persons in our country suffer from hypertension. I think it's 1 in 3 that suffer from hypertension and 1 in 5 that suffer from diabetes. And these are 2 of the primary NCDs that plague our country, in addition then to cancer and, of course, chronic respiratory illness, etc. It is projected that worldwide, 65 years and older persons within that category will grow to 1.5 billion people by 2050. By the year 2050, it is expected that 1.5 billion people on the face of the earth will be 65 years and older. There's also statistics that show that 75% of the deaths amongst persons who are 65 years and older are caused by non-communicable diseases. So therefore, all of this paints the picture and underscores why it is important for the minister and his team to have brought an update to this national policy on aging. It underscores, because the reality that we're facing as a country is that we are aging and we are aged. And with a decline or a slowing birth rate, and with persons living longer, you then create almost, I don't want to call it a perfect storm, but you create a challenge. Let me call it a challenge. You create a challenge where you have to now balance these 2 competing almost realities. And it is the responsibility of a right-thinking, progressive government and administration to think about how we can ensure that we are providing adequate healthcare services so that our people, even as they age, that they do so in an active and in a healthy manner. We need to ensure that our elderly, our older persons, can afford medications that they need as they age. We need to ensure that our elderly can access medical services when they need it. Not only emergency, but even preventative. Whether this be dental, whether this be eye care, whether this be general checks, wellness checks. We need to ensure that these things are accessible to our people so that we can create the environment where our citizens, as they age, they can continue to be productive contributors to our society. And unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, I must say here that we do have a challenge with our country relative to accepting the contribution of our people as they age. There was a time in this country where a grandma and a grandma, a matriarch or patriarch of the family, were still highly revered, respected. They were sought for their guidance, their advice. They were a central part of the family. They kept the family together. And it seems, Madam Deputy Speaker, that as a part of the evolution of our society, that another negative that we are seeing is that we are now trying to relegate our mature people, our elderly citizens, to the back seat of life. This level of ageism that we are recognizing amongst our people, young and old, where we're trying to shelve people who have made significant contributions so far, and those who still have the capacity to make contributions now and into the future. And I think that we must, as a government, come against that mindset, that ethos, that way of operating, and we must become a more inclusive, all-embracing country relative to our elderly and encourage them to play the most active roles they can play, but we must support them in being able to play these roles. I must say here and out that we have excellent healthcare professionals in Barbados. Typically, you would hear persons registering complaints with certain aspects of our healthcare system, and that is understandable. And in many cases, there is legitimate cause for concern in some of the aspects of our healthcare system. But I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I can probably poll 100 Barbadians in Swan Street this afternoon when we leave here. And if we were to ask them about how they viewed our healthcare professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the clinicians, the physicians of many different categories and disciplines, many of them will agree that we have top-notch, top-drawer healthcare professionals in this country. Many of them will agree with that. Many of them will state that my doctor is the best doctor in the world. Everybody's doctor is the best doctor in the world. So I think that we have a general healthcare professional services and individuals who deliver excellent care on a daily basis for the most part. But there are some areas that we need to bolster and strengthen, and even as we speak about providing excellent health care to our elderly and our aging population, we need some more specialist individuals. Gerontology is a specialty that requires additional support. And I must say here, Madam Deputy Speaker, almost as an aside, but it aligns with what I'm saying. Every year, the Ministry of Education puts out our national development scholarships. And of course, as a cabinet, there's the deliberation as to where are we going? Where are we seeking to take our country? And every ministry usually puts forward areas where there's a need. So if there's a need for a gerontologist, the Minister of Health would say such. If there's a need for physiotherapists, the Minister of Health will put that forward. And then we advertise these national development scholarships, and we hope that our citizens would go forward and would take them up, because this is where we see the need for our national development. And I say here now that I want to encourage the people of Barbados, the young people of Barbados, as you're beginning to leave school and you're starting to open your mind as to the possibilities. Listen to what your government is asking for, seek to pursue courses of action that will help us as a nation to develop. So when you hear and you get those opportunities to apply for these scholarships, don't just pass it off and say, I want to be a X or I want to be a Y. Give consideration to it, because you may be helping our nation in a significant way, in a way that really matters the most. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Health and Wellness has undertaken an approach to the delivery of health care that focuses on primary health care. We have placed greater emphasis on primary health care. And I would like to, at this time, just say that whilst people will focus on our tertiary healthcare institution, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and see it as the only part of healthcare, and they will use it to say healthcare in Barbados is not where it should be, I want to say that that is tertiary healthcare. That's a tertiary healthcare institution. Primary healthcare includes our polyclinics, your general practitioner, your general physician, who will see you in their office privately. And they will look at you and they will do their general checks on you and make sure that everything is where it should be, all your levels are where they're supposed to be, make sure that you're in generally good health. So as a strategy, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, led ably by our senior minister in the other place, has undertaken an approach to our healthcare delivery where we're focusing on primary healthcare. And one of the key underlying components of primary healthcare is prevention more so than cure. We want to focus our people on preventing illness and preventing disease rather than curing disease. It is far more expensive, Madam Deputy Speaker, to cure some of the illnesses that our people face in this country. So we're trying to encourage our population with a focus, for example, on non-communicable diseases and the prevention thereof. We're trying to focus our people on how we can prevent the onset of illnesses and diseases that will cause morbidity, that will cause you to fall into illness and disease, that will then erode your quality of life. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I must urge our people to take their health seriously. We as a country depend on every single one of our citizens to make Barbados what it is. I come along hearing, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Barbados really doesn't have any natural resources, and this is indeed true to a large extent. We don't have enough that we can do anything with of any notable measure. But what we do have, and what has always been the boast of this little island, is our human resources. And that's a valuable resource. But as a valuable resource, we must protect it. And I therefore encourage our people, take your health seriously. It's as simple as even doing your annual checks. There are a lot of people, and I may be speaking more so to men today than women, because there is a trend amongst gentlemen that they will not go to a doctor unless they've fallen down, about to collapse. And I want to reverse that trend with every statement that I make, because we as men have a role to play in our society, and we cannot do it if we're in ill health. We cannot play our role in the best possible way. We cannot play our role in the best possible way if we're not managing and maintaining our health, Madam Deputy Speaker. So it can be as simple as just going to do an annual checkup. Check your vitals. See where your blood pressure is. See where your blood sugar is. Honourable member for St. Andrew. And all of us. See where you are and where you stand so that you can make corrective and you can take corrective action. It doesn't matter what the news is, it is that you can then take that information and you can take corrective action and measures that would allow you to address the issue. So as I said, we are focusing on primary health care. We want our elderly and our general population to get their eyes checked. Get your teeth checked. And we're doing as much as we can within the Ministry of Education to bolster the environment and to strengthen and to enhance the environment. And of course, it is no secret now that we are undertaking a significant renovation project across our polyclinics, which will also see the creation of 2 new polyclinics, where I would say replacing 2 old polyclinics with 2 new polyclinics, 2 full rebuilds. But every other polyclinic within our system right now will also benefit from significant upgrades and renovations so that we can better serve our public. And since we're focusing on primary health care and community-based health care, where we're going into the communities, there was a time, Madam Deputy Speaker, where the community nurse was known by all. And the community nurse would come from house to house and make sure everybody's green card was checked and the vaccinations were up to date, etc. And then there was also a relationship with the schools. So they would go down to the schools and they would check there as well. You had to carry your green. I remember carrying my green folded and dog-eared immunization cards and vaccination cards. And they would check and they would make sure everything was where it should be. And then you would carry it back home. These were all aspects of primary health care that we did well at many years ago. And there are aspects of our primary health care that we are returning to in due course. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has allocated just over $59 million this year to the primary health care undertakings of this ministry. $59 million has been allocated in this year alone to shoring up our primary health care resources so we can do exactly what I'm describing, which is a strategy of the ministry to ensure that we can deliver preventative care, on-time care, in-place care, community care to our citizens in Barbados so that as they age, they can age in a healthy and productive and dignified manner. And as I say dignified, it reminds me again of Pamelia Brayton, a very dignified individual. And understood and was a champion asking for our older people to be treated with dignity, even when they had Alzheimer's and they were no longer who they used to be. She said, even though that person is no longer the mother that you knew her to be, or the father that you knew him to be, he must still be treated with dignity. And that's how we want to treat all of our citizens. So what are we doing to better support our aging, our aged society, and attacking these NCDs, non-communicable diseases? We have created a National NCD Commission, and this commission has been on the ground doing some very good work. Even up to last week, we had a concentrated engagement with our NGOs, our non-governmental organizations, and it was focused on NCDs and how we can all play a part strategically between the government, between civil society, between the private sector, how we can work together. And you will hear even more of these types of collaborations as we go forward and as announcements are made, because I believe that one of the driving forces behind effective execution of this strategy will be collaboration. Just like the National Policy on Aging speaks to a whole of government approach to ensuring that we provide social services to our aged, healthcare services to our aged, financial and economic resources and services to them as well that are accessible and affordable. All of what we do as a government has to support our thrust. So we've created the NCD Commission. And we want, as a commission and as a ministry, to focus on the determinants of NCDs. And I would reiterate these over and over again. 1, inadequate physical exercise and activity. Too many of our people, Madam Deputy Speaker, are sitting down on a daily basis. They're not as active. We, even within this hallowed place, spend a lot of time sitting down. In fact, it is said that sitting down is now one of the biggest underlying determinants of ill health. And it's up there with smoking. It's being ranked up there with smoking. Can you imagine, Madam Deputy Speaker, that just sitting down for the excessive lengths of time upon which we sit, and if you were to measure it, if you were to measure the amount of hours, the amount of minutes that we will spend in a seated position on a daily basis, it would scare us. But inadequate physical exercise and activity is one. Excessive use of alcohol. I put the word excessive in front of it because if I don't say excessive, some of my colleagues will probably tell me to sit down. If I just said use of alcohol, I will probably get shouted out of here. So I have to make sure I qualify excessive use of alcohol, which continues to be and has already been established as one of the determinants of ill health as well, causing issues with with your liver and kidneys, and sometimes also being linked to many cancers. Diets, of course, that are high in sodium and sugar. We consume too much salt, we consume too much sugar as a society. It's almost a part of our cultural DNA, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we need to reverse that trend. And we need to reverse it not only at the level of our mature citizens and our aging, but we also need to reverse it, and many of our strategies are now targeting our youth. And we're working with many of our partners to ensure that there is a healthy campaign to improve the knowledge and the awareness amongst our younger members of society, our primary school students in particular, and then our secondary school students. And that's why we have supported strongly. We have continued to be an avid partner and strategic partner with the Ministry of Education relative to the rollout of the school nutrition policy to ensure that our young people have the best possible information at hand so that their palates, so that their way of approaching their diets and their way of approaching life in general is tailored in a way that works. And of course, and to a lesser extent here in the Barbados context, tobacco use. That is also one of the determinants of NCDs. And we know that that is linked for sure to many cancers. We have also established a health promotion unit. The health promotion unit also plays a part of driving information to our public relative to how they can better manage their lives and their lifestyles, knowing that many of the NCDs that we're facing are lifestyle diseases. And with adjustments to your lifestyle, with adjustments to your diet, with adjustments to your sleeping patterns, your rest patterns, your water intake, your physical activity, with adjustments there too, you can actually stave off, and in some cases, reverse many of these NCDs. I will go further than the school nutrition policy, Madam Deputy Speaker, to also say here that we are in the process of working on, and it is at a very advanced stage, close to finalization, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, close to finalization of a national nutrition policy. And the national nutrition policy, just like the school nutrition policy, really has a focus on ensuring that our general population understands the value of good nutrition, of physical exercise and activity for their good health. I need to move quickly, Madam Deputy Speaker, because once again, we're focusing on our elderly and the care that's being provided. And a major part on this resolution, a major part on this national policy on aging is to ensure that our citizens have access to the best healthcare services. Our geriatric healthcare facilities, Madam Deputy Speaker, at our St. Lucie District Hospital, we have about 35 beds. At the St. Michael District Hospital, about 250 beds. In the St. Philip District Hospital, we have about 100 beds. These are geriatric beds that are available, that are there right now being utilized for those in our society who need to be housed in place within a facility. We also have a robust program, an initiative, one that I think is one of the crown jewels of the primary health care and of course the overall healthcare network within the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We have what is called the Advanced Care of the Elderly program. And this is where we work with private sector entities as well. And they provide the beds, and the Ministry of Health and Wellness provides them with the funds that are required to ensure that those persons who lay in those beds, those persons who utilize those beds, receive the adequate care that they are supposed to. There are some gaps in our service. Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do have a phenomenon in our country where many persons, I wouldn't say many, let me not say many, let me take that back. There are some persons within our society who are bringing their elderly family members to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and leaving them there. It is an unfortunate reality that we're facing. In many cases, these persons are nursed back to good health. They don't need to be at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital any longer, but there's nobody there to take them back to their homes. It's heartbreaking. And it is something that I would like to discourage, even as I stand in this place. I would like to discourage our people from dropping off your elderly and not looking back at them, whether it is at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital or anywhere else for that matter. These persons would have made a contribution to our society. They deserve better than that. And wherever we see it, we will stamp it out. Wherever we can do something about it, we will address it. But we're encouraging the people of Barbados not to continue in this regard. Of course, as I begin to wind up, everyone knows about the new facility that is going to be built at Waterford, just above Waterford, the top of Waterford and Bell. Our new geriatric facility that will host in phase 1, 500 beds or so approximately. It will obviously take over from our main campus in St. Michael. But it has expanded services. This is state-of-the-art, cutting-edge, forward-thinking planning that has gone into the development and the designs of that space. And when it is finished, I believe that it will take our healthcare service relative to the elderly to another level. And I'm happy to state that when that facility is established, there will be a specialized area and concentration relative to dementia care and Alzheimer's. I know that there are many different avenues, there are many different private sector entities, even the same Barbados Alzheimer's Association that has been advocating for, and even here I support their advocacy, relative to having their own space as a daycare facility. And I know that there have been some conversations with the government relative to this. And I hope that those conversations will continue to advance and that someday we will be able to see the Alzheimer's Association and the government of Barbados and whoever else partnering to establish a facility like this. And as I close, Madam Deputy Speaker, I give my full support to this policy on aging. I believe that as a healthcare institution that we're already doing a stellar job of providing care to our elderly, but more needs to be done. Our elderly must be able to walk into any healthcare facility and receive urgent care and attention. They should be able to walk into any of our facilities and be prioritized simply because they are elderly. Simply because. Not because I know them or somebody else knows them, but simply because they have made a contribution to our society and they deserve to be treated with that level of respect and to be given that level of favor. I want our elderly to take their health seriously, so even as I close, I encourage the members of our society, usually elderly is 65 and older, but I will even go further down. All of our people who are 50 and over need to take their health more seriously and ensure that you're doing your regular checks and your specialist checks wherever necessary as well. So I support wholeheartedly, ma'am and Madam Deputy Speaker, I support wholeheartedly this policy on aging. I look forward in the Ministry of Health and from the perspective of the Ministry of Health, and in particular as it relates to the fight against NCDs, to ensuring that I can play my part in creating an environment, nutritionally, environmentally, and otherwise, that supports our people as they age in place actively and healthily. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and join my colleagues in sharing on the elder policy. I want to sincerely congratulate the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs for doing all the necessary hard work and heavy lifting to be able to create a policy document that will help to guide Barbados in how we are going to care for the elderly persons in our island. Because Barbados is the only home that they have, is the only home that we have, and all of us in this chamber and all of us in this society will eventually be old. And therefore this elder policy program is absolutely important for everyone to focus on because it will affect all of us. And if we're going to be building a republic, if we're going to be building a nation that is going to take care of all of its citizens from the cradle all the way to their old age, then we have to pay attention to how we coordinate and manage the services, how we do our policy in the other ministries that help to support the population to ensure that everyone is taken care of. And I want to salute the Honourable Member for St. Michael North and the Honourable Member in the other chamber who's responsible for health. I want to thank him for the activities and initiatives that have been put on the ground to really help us with our elderly in the community, and I deeply appreciate it because I've seen the work myself. I come from a constituency that is very, very aged. I have over 11,000 constituents, and of those 11,000 constituents, I have between 6,000 and 7,000 who are over the age of 60. So I come from an aged constituency, and therefore today, this is the reason why I rise to raise my voice and contribute my ideas to the elder policy. Barbados is part of a global phenomenon that is taking place in the developed world. And what we have in terms of statistics shows us that Barbados is right up there with a lot of the developed countries. Barbados has over 21% of its population over 60. Japan has 28, Italy 23, Finland 22, Portugal 22, Greece 22. America is also an aging society. And what it means is that all of these nations have to grapple with coming up with initiatives, coming up with projects that will help us in terms of ensuring that the elderly or our silver constituents are not only properly managed, but properly integrated and enjoying and living a comfortable life. Now, what has presented a big challenge to us, we are at 270,000 constituents, citizens in Barbados, and right now our replacement birth rate is minus 1.3. That's a problem for us. Our population is actually shrinking. We have approximately 50 to 60,000, as I said, over age 60. We've got 40,000 that are in school. And you have, of the working population, a large section of our population who are earning wages that come from unskilled labor, which means that the wages are very little, and therefore those wages make it difficult for them to actually manage daily living. So it's a problem. What we then have would be no more than 80,000 people who are left to carry the taxes in this country, to carry and support the NIS, to support the businesses. So the more that middle group there shrinks, the more of them that go over into the elder category, the greater the suffering will be in the economy, the greater the suffering will be in the homes, the greater the suffering will be in terms of the provision of government services and our capacity to meet the needs of the elderly because the NIS will be shrinking. It is a major problem. And that is why this government, taking the bull by the horns and putting in place an elder policy program, is absolutely necessary to help us rebalance the society, that it can remain viable and that we can create the economic growth and create the services that are needed for the elderly, for the young, for everyone in between, so that we can take care of them. Now, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North spoke about the impact of NCDs and the various other challenges at a health level on the elderly. And we know that the impact on the economy is about $140 million per year in cost or lost productivity because we do not have the kind of program that is needed to help our people to live more healthy. And that's why I really appreciate what he shared in terms of the efforts now that are being made by putting in a nutritional policy to start from school, because you can't wait until people get old to try to help them with their diet. If we can start early, then we're going to be preventing that deterioration in health. But it isn't only that you have that person who is not able to function, you also have the fact that the people who have to stop and care for that person who can no longer function, that has an impact on them, their lives, and their own productivity where they work. So it's an ever-spreading problem that we are creating if we don't tackle the issue of improving the health care for our elderly and helping people to do better in terms of their diet and their exercise. So where are we at in terms of what are we going to do to help us deal with the problem of people aging? We simply do not have enough space to take care of all of our aging in institutions. between the private sector, between the geriatric hospital. There simply is not enough. The question is, what are we going to do to address the potential impacts of having an aged population? How are we going to stabilize the economic growth with an aging population? So here are some recommendations I think that we can consider if we are going to be able to work with our seniors. First of all, we have to look at increasing the functionality of our seniors by reducing the impact of poor health. But this requires not just the Ministry of Health. This has to command the attention of families and all family members. We cannot have a situation where the elderly are getting older, their needs are not understood, are not catered to by the younger persons in the family, and then suddenly when they get ill and now require care, it now becomes a heavy lift for the family, along with the Ministry of Health, to take care of that impact. And it's easy to happen, Madam Deputy Speaker. All of us know that we felt that our parents were standing in front of us like Colossus, strong, would always be there, would always be able to help. Sometimes it took time for us to notice that they'd become older. It took time for us to notice that they were more feeble, that they were less able. But we still continue to put demands on those parents because we thought that they'll be there forever. And it comes as a shock. It comes as a shock to a child, an adult child, when they suddenly realize, my parent is no longer able, and recognize that they now have a role reversal that is going to affect them psychologically, where the parent is no longer responsible for you or there for you. You now have to be responsible for them. You now have to take care of them. And this is a challenge to a number of families. And that is why I feel very, very strongly that teaching about elder care and preparing people for becoming elderly and families to take care of elderly members is something that we have to include in what we are doing in our country. Whether we introduce it in terms of some part of the educational process to be able to prepare people and help people to know how to function with aged people and to take care of their own aging, whether we have to put in the community programs, whether we have to put things on the radio and in social media to start to educate and prepare Barbadians for understanding that we are living in an aged society and that families have to function better and individuals have to take better care of their health. The other thing that has to happen if we're going to build a republic that is responsive to the needs of the elderly is to improve the quality of service and service delivery. And what does that mean? So often, ma'am, we put down a business or an institution, we put down an organization, it functions in a particular way. But over time, the persons who use those organizations are getting older and their needs are changing. And sometimes the organization ignores that and continues to put in place rules, regulations, stipulations, ways of service delivery that may have worked when people were younger but are no longer appropriate for people as they get older. And therefore we have to teach not only our public institutions but our private sector institutions that they need to look, even simple things like parking, where do you provide for your customers to park? How many places you go into and the staff are all parked right underneath the front door of a building, and the customers have to park all the way in the back and walk. Many of these are elderly people. Many of them have to come by bus. So the point I'm making here is that we have to look at how are we deploying our buses, how are we operating our polyclinics, how are we operating our pharmacies, our banks. I remember there was one bank in the building area finally recognized that most of the people who came into them were elderly, and they started to put some seating around the banking hall to allow those elderly people to sit, but many other banks never did it. That's the point that I'm making, that every institution in Barbados now has to look at how it offers its service, how it lays out its facilities, and ensure that they are friendly for seniors. Now, I want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael North who mentioned the issue of the National Development Scholarships and the issue of gerontology. For a long time, there was only one gerontologist in Barbados. One. We now have a young one who has now come on, a young doctor who has studied gerontology because she recognized that her caseload and her patients were all aging and that she needed to do more in terms of her capacity to help them. Now, we need more. And this is where I think one of the things we have to do as a government is we need to spend more time advertising and promoting what are the national needs, what are the areas that we need people to function in, and spread that right around the country on a consistent basis so that we can begin to attract young people into the specific areas of national need. So I want to support him on that point, that we need to do this, so that we're able to start and fill the gaps within our support system in Barbados. Now, I am strongly of the view that we can build a silver economy simply because if you sit and think about what are the needs of the elderly, there are a number of business opportunities, startups, and young entrepreneurs can begin to focus on shaping the business that they have put in place to be able to service the elderly, because the elderly are the ones who will gradually be in the majority in the economy. So therefore, even our tourism has to make that shift. Because not only are we aging here in Barbados, the people who are accustomed coming to Barbados with the high repeat guest rate that we have, all of them are aging. We have to look at how do we add to our tourism product that helps to make it suitable for people who've been here 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, and want a different experience. Maybe when they come, they want to engage with others within Barbados that have common interests with them. Could not a hotel create some sort of club or group that meets there that gives the older people in the hotel the opportunity to engage Barbadians and do things together? What are some of the things that we can do to help take advantage of the fact that we can meet the needs of a silver economy? How can we put in place those additional things that will help our economy to work, serving the elderly? Now, an issue that is of great importance to the elderly is the issue of security and safety. And if you look at our statistics in the census population, one of the things that you will notice that a significant number, the majority of our homes have one or two persons living in them. And this was quite a surprise to me when I first learned it. But what it tells us is that there are a number of people who live alone, or they're elderly people living together who are at risk when it comes to the issue of safety, when it comes to the issue of crime. And what this does, it helps to limit the level of engagement elderly people have with the wider community because they're afraid. Just their failing eyesight makes it difficult for them to go out to the things, to drive and go to the things that they really want to go to. And so their social life becomes more narrow, they have less engagement and stimulation, and the end result is that they're then subject to greater mental illness because they don't have that stimulating engagement with a wide number of people. So the question is, how can we deal with this? Now, one of the things, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I think we need to do to help increase that sense of security and safety in communities, especially for elderly people, really is the formation of neighborhood watch groups, which allows them to be a part of their wider community, engaging and knowing that there are people in the community who are looking out for them and that they know that there's somebody who can respond if they have an issue or if they see something. And I think that this is important. I feel so strongly about it. I would have shared with the Chamber before that in St. James South, we spent time forming neighborhood groups all across our communities for this very reason. And just as we had the impact from Beryl, the neighborhood watch groups became even more vibrant, and people started to say, well, look, I was not in the group, but I want to get in now, because they're recognizing that community togetherness is an important aspect of helping to build security and safety. And this is what is going to be needed for our elderly if they're going to be able to feel comfortable in their homes and relax in their homes and not be afraid every time they hear a noise outside of their home. Now, a matter that disturbs me greatly, and I think it has caught the attention of a number of people in the society, and that is the deterioration of assets, especially among middle-class retirees. That when they were in their peak earning salaries, they were able to afford building a house of a particular style and size. But over time, with retirement, the cost of the maintenance and upkeep has gotten beyond them to be able to do it. And what we're seeing as we drive around the country, we are seeing that there is a deterioration of homes and people unable to find the resources. They don't have sufficient time to be able to go and get a mortgage because they only have a few more years of life, and no one will want to give them a mortgage in old age, and so an asset deteriorates. Very often their children are already trying to take care of their own homes or their own living circumstances and cannot assist the elderly parents with the repair of that home. However, that home is an asset that they could inherit that could assist them on their journey of living and planning their families. So the question is, what can we do? And this is why I feel that if we start early within the education system, the community system, to start and teach people about becoming seniors, managing for your life, not just your middle years, but in your senior years, to help people to understand that I have to think about what I can do with this asset that I have, this house, that would be good for me. Now, I know that we've talked a lot about reverse mortgages, but along with reverse mortgages, I would like to think that if we could create a pool of funds and create a housing pool of assets that need restoring, that a senior person could put their home in that pool, have it repaired, and then that home could then be rented or leased, and the revenue coming from that can look to pay for the refurbishment. But at the same time, there may be some funds left over from that payment that can go towards their care, while they are able to move into something similar to the Seroptimus villages. I know that this government has started talking about the need to build more of those, but in order to get the elderly to utilize those services, it is necessary to start educating them, but also helping them with their current assets, so that they can easily move from where they are now, shift into more convenient and smaller premises that they can better manage themselves, while at the same time still have a valuable asset that is in good condition, that when they leave this earth, it is something that they can leave to their children. If the payment has not been completed, the children can complete that payment. I believe that this is one of the ways in which we can restore a lot of these houses that are deteriorating around the country and posing a problem of sanitation, etc., and safety in a community. One of the things I want to draw to the attention of the chamber, however, is the fact that our people are living longer, yes, but what is happening is that the skills as people become older become less relevant. And therefore, many people, when they retire, may find it difficult to find additional income because the skills are not on par. And this is why I believe, as part of what we're doing in education, we need to be looking at stimulating private sector investment in providing the elderly and people who are going to retire to start and reskill. Because their base knowledge may be still good, but they might need to know the more modern way of doing that. That person who comes out from the civil service that has all those years of experience, they no longer work in the civil service, but they could be available to provide assistance or a kind of a help desk for the other civil servants who might be in that position, and get a small stipend for being able to provide that service using the online technology. And that way we make available to the civil service a lot of those skills until the civil service stabilizes. It's the same thing that needs to be done in the private sector, because a lot of them have people who are going to be retiring en masse, and they're going to find themselves with a skills problem. And I think we have to find a way to repurpose and reskill our seniors, and then position them that they can feed back in to the civil service, to the private sector, and into the community using the volunteer model. I think that those things are going to be important. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to get to the place where we prepare the next generation to help them understand aging, planning for retirement, understanding how to use their assets, so that we are able to shift the problem that we have coming to us, where we're going to find ourselves with tens of thousands of elderly people who've not been able to save enough, who have not taken care of their health, who may not have the health insurance, may not have a lot in NIS, and then will find themselves in a situation of severe poverty, lack, and want, because they do not have the resources and their families don't have the resources. So I think that this work is important. And let me congratulate the Honourable Member for St. Michael South for the excellent work of his team in putting this together. And I trust that as we continue down the road, as we prepare our estimates, that we'll continue to put resources that help to facilitate and serve the elderly, to ensure that they have a place in this republic, they have a comfortable life in this republic, they have a safe life in this republic. I'm obliged to you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to share a few thoughts and add a few words to the debate on the national policy on aging. This policy on aging and the debate that we started before the recess and that we've continued today is of, maybe I should say, particular significance to me. Not because my children consider me to be elderly, but because I reflect on the reality that I live on a day-to-day basis. Having grown up in a house with a very active set of parents, including a very active mother, who was an educator for quite some time, almost 40 years, and who nurtured my sister and myself, and who maybe about 5 or 6 years ago did not call me on my birthday, as she had done for over 40 years before that. And it was on that day, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I realized that something was either wrong or going wrong. My mother today has dementia, and the matter of reversal of roles is something that I have to deal with very frequently. The first time I had to lift her, that role reversal struck home, because in my infancy, she lifted me. Mm. And these are some of the realities that many Barbadians face on a daily basis. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not be overly harsh on Barbadians who sometimes, probably not fully thinking it through, act out their frustration or act out their inability to cope by ignoring the challenge that they face. That is to say, those persons who, out of this feeling that there is nothing they can do, I do not know where to find help, decide to do what they may consider as abandoning the problem or turning their back on the problem or on the challenge, what they consider to be a problem. I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the reality we face, along with the statistics that we shared, and every time the Honourable Member for St. Michael South shares it, it shocks me. The fact that in a few years, most of our population will be at or over the age of 65 if we continue on the current trajectory. It means that we have an existing challenge, and we have before us, if nothing is done, an even greater challenge. And it is on that basis that I rise to strongly support this national policy on aging. We are facing a significant challenge. So just like individual households and members of households are facing challenges in addressing the needs and dealing with the care that is required for older persons, at the national level, we are also facing a challenge. I appeal to Barbadians to adopt the same approach that government is adopting. That is to say, let us acknowledge that there is a situation. So that situation may be at my home or at somebody else's home. Just like government has accepted that we have a situation that is potentially challenging, let us all do that at the micro domestic level or at the macro national level. And let us put plans in place to address the challenges. Challenges do not disappear. We cannot wish them away. We have to confront them. And we have, like my predecessor as Member of Parliament for St. Peter, the one who we in St. Peter will never forget, we have to face it and fix it. We have to do that at the domestic household level. We have to do that at the national level. This national policy on aging is part of the process of facing it and fixing it. What is clear, and we share this in the debate when we address the changes at the National Insurance Board and the National Insurance and Social Security Service, what is clear for us is that we want our people to live long, to live as long as possible. We want to live long. We want to live as long as possible. Now, it means that if we desire that goal, there are certain things we need to put in place to make sure that that process does not become a burden to others or too much of a burden to others, but also that it does not become a challenge for those of us who are growing older. In this intervention, I'm going to mention a few discrete things, discrete meaning they're not necessarily connected, except that they all refer to the matter of aging. We have a situation, and I will not say that it is pervasive, because as far as we in the Ministry of Labour understand, and based on our information, it is not pervasive. But we have a situation where there are a few employing organizations who have traditionally had retirement ages, or a retirement age, which mirrored the pensionable age that we had become accustomed to. And so it was understood that in some of these organizations, these employing organizations, not necessarily businesses, but mainly businesses, but I use the word employing organizations, that persons would retire at 65. We've had situations where after the pensionable age was changed to 67, and after 67, well, we went through some steps before we got to 67, but once the pensionable age moved, there were some organizations that were insisting, and up to relatively recently, that are insisting that persons retire at 65. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is unconscionable. And maybe if I had the vocabulary of the predecessor I previously quoted, there is other phrasing I could use which may more adequately express what I feel on this matter. But I'm calling on employing organizations, even in situations where there are written contracts that speak to retirement at 65. I'm asking those organizations to have at least a little bit of conscience. Express some level of humanity. Do not force persons who have toiled in your vineyards to apply to the National Insurance and Social Security Service for a reduced pension. Once you apply early, that is to say before pensionable age, your pension is reduced. We have had situations where workers who have worked hard, who have contributed not just to their own personal development, but to the development of the organizations that they work for, have been, and I use these words without any apology, put out to pasture. That is not right. It is not fair. It is not pervasive, but it exists. So I keep referring to the fact that it's not pervasive because I do not want to paint all employing organizations as engaging in that kind of activity. But I'm of the view that if there are one or two or three persons, and those of us of faith, particularly of the Christian faith, like to use the term twos and threes. If there are 2 or 3 older people who are impacted, that is 2 or 3 persons too much. And I, in the context of this national policy, feel the need to encourage our employers, all employers, to treat to our older people, recognizing their humanity, recognizing their contribution, and recognizing that they should not be forced into a situation where they suffer a detriment or where they are put at a disadvantage. Now, there is another, and I'm trying to speak to some of the negatives first, because I do not want to end my intervention on a negative note. We have some other employing organizations who engage workers and who, in their crass attempt to reduce their costs, engage them as self-employed persons with the view of reducing their costs so that they do not enlist them as employees and as persons who you have to pay your 12-point-something% contribution to NIS for. Now, what that does, Madam Deputy Speaker, and what it has done, because all of us who represent people have been visited by those, have been approached by those who have worked, who may or may not have known that national insurance was not being deducted, who may have enjoyed the benefits of not having national insurance deducted, but who reach their evening years and recognize that they do not have the contributions at national insurance that would allow them to receive a decent pension, a decent old age pension. I'm saying to employing organizations and employers that as we engage workers, as employers engage workers, employers must be cognizant that these workers will become old if they live long enough. And so there is a responsibility on the worker to make sure that they're engaged in the social security system, but there's also a responsibility on the employer to ensure that those who they engage to work as employees and not as under the guise of self-employed, they're talking about genuinely employed persons, that they have a responsibility to make sure that they're part of the social security system, that they're part of the national insurance scheme. We've also, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to call this out early before it starts to take root. Just yesterday at my management meeting, I was informed of an employer, so again, a single employer, who is doing what we call hiding employees. So there are a certain number of employees who are on the schedule for national insurance, but based on the undercover work that we have done, and you know, it is not nice that my labor officers have to do undercover work, but when the situation requires, that's what we have to do. And there are more persons working in the establishment than those who appear on the national insurance schedule. Those workers will become elderly if they live long enough. All employers have a responsibility to the human beings who work with them, who support the building of their enterprises or entities. They have a responsibility, a moral responsibility. Moral responsibility. When we're dealing with human beings, sometimes we have to look past the legal responsibilities. We're not dealing with land. We're not dealing with machinery. We're not dealing with technology. And that is the reason why I find it very difficult to include labor in these factors when people use labor to refer to people. But that is a philosophical discussion for another day. When we are dealing with human beings, we sometimes have to look past the legal requirement and look and address the humanity of the persons who are working in our establishments. Yep. And so I encourage employers to do the right thing. And I will say to employers that the Ministry of Labor made a decision yesterday that we are going to be engaging in the law courts a lot more than we have been before. So we are not going to be messing around with the bad apples or whatever worse term those who have different vocabulary will want to use to describe those apples. We will be addressing these issues within the confines and constraints of our resources in terms of our people resources and our time resources. Many of those who have spoken in this debate so far have addressed the matter of active aging. And I think that is something that we need to embrace on the individual level, but also at the national level. Our people must be encouraged to stay active for as long as is possible. Staying active does not mean, as some of my older constituents may say, continuing to slave, quote unquote, as they were for 30, 40, or 50 years. But we have to create an environment, where people can transition from one kind of activity, which may be work in an establishment, to either to reduce levels of work or to different types of activity. But our people need to stay active. We need to stay active physically, and that was addressed earlier. I'm not going to repeat that. We need to stay active physically. We also need to stay active mentally. Now, I am no physician. I'm not the honorable member for St. Philip North. That is not my area. But I grew up hearing that if you don't use it, you lose it. And if I apply that to brain cells, and I'm not saying that that is the case, I don't know. But I just have the feeling that if we continue to use our brains, we could possibly delay the onset of some of these diseases that we have to grapple with. In any case, being active is always a good thing. And I am encouraging our older people and our younger people, but as we get older, to remain active. Many people look forward to retirement, to traveling the world, not having to wake up to go to work, and I look forward to that as well. But let us not look forward to times when we just sit down, sleep, go to the shop, come back home, and reduce our activity to the extent that it may affect us. We have, in our ministry, developed the workplace wellness, well, not developed, because the development happened with the Barbados Workers Union, and we continue to thank them for that. But we are in the process of implementing the policy, the National Workplace Wellness Policy, and we continue to give Brother Orlando Gabby Scott, who was the champion, and the wider Barbados Workers Union family credit for doing the hard work to develop this. But we've adopted this as the national policy because we recognize that persons spend significant amounts of their working time at the workplace. And so we've engaged with the ministry responsible for wellness, and they have agreed that we'll take on, under the umbrella of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, we'll take on the workplace component. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to say that we are making progress. We have done some visits to business places. We've been engaging with workers on how they can look after their wellness. And we know about the difference between health and wellness, but how they can look after their wellness while in the workplace. And we have also said to employers and to the safety and health committees that are mandated to exist by the Safety and Health at Work Act. We've asked the safety and health committees to take on or to expand their focus to include wellness without losing sight or without taking their focus away from safety and health in the workplace. We believe it is possible, and we are working hard to encourage workers and to encourage their employers to look after their wellness while in the workplace. And maybe, Madam Deputy Speaker, I could share at this point that Cabinet has approved the designation of this month, September, as Wellness Month. And I would encourage all Barbadians to think a little bit more, focus a little bit more this month and beyond on this whole matter of wellness. Not just being healthy, but being well, and being well psychologically, spiritually, financially, physically, and in all the various areas. We've also, in our ministry, because we recognize that a policy on aging, and I think a number of members, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North mentioned it, and the Honourable Member for St. James South mentioned it earlier. You are not born elderly. So you become older. And it means that if we're going to be able to age well, we have to be doing some of those good things as we move through our life stages. I've said to a number of my constituents in groups and individually that one of the saddest periods in my life in this role was to hear some response to the school nutrition policy. Now, I am very clear with my words, and even though some say that politics is a popularity contest, I don't go down that road. So I've said to many of my constituents that I am absolutely disappointed with anybody who treats the school nutrition policy as though somebody is trying to poison their children. Asking children to drink more water and eat more fruits and vegetables, I just cannot understand how parents, and I'm not talking about children, how parents could oppose this kind of a nutrition policy. It boggles my mind. Pepsi and Coke and I know what, add Pine Hill juices to that because they got just as much sugar. I think they all need to be called out, Madam Deputy Speaker. They are destroying our people. And when we destroy children cannot be good and healthy elderly people. It don't work so. You start wrong, you end wrong. We have to call out these people, and when I say these people, I'm talking about entities that are making money out of destroying people. I don't like them. I don't like them. You can't be making money out of destroying people's health and then use the excuse that this is what the people want. I don't understand how you do that. And I don't subscribe to it. So matters like the school nutrition policy is something that, while it seems distant from a national policy on aging, is very related, because a national policy on aging is not just a national policy on the elderly or a national policy on the aged. It is a national policy on aging. And as some people sometimes comically say, from the time you're born, you're told that you're some amount of weeks old. So old is attached even when you're young. And if a national policy on aging is to have impact, then we have to work with our people right through the life cycle. The other thing that we are encouraging at the ministry is that we want employing organizations, wherever people are working, to consider mothers of newborn babies. And that is to say, to put, wherever possible, systems in place that allow women to be able to express and safely store breast milk. Because we believe that if we are to take care of our people through the entire life cycle and have active and good aged people, then those things that predispose persons to be healthy at later stages in their lives must be encouraged. And so we, from time to time, collaborate with the Breastfeeding and Child Nutrition Foundation, and we encourage employers to have these facilities, allow mothers to be able, those who so desire, to be able to express their milk and store it safely so that their children can be the beneficiaries of that nutritious substance. The final thing I want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is a bit of circling back to close to where it started. All Barbadians need to be a part of the National Insurance Scheme. If you live long enough, you're going to get old. If you live long enough, there will come a point in time when you're not able to engage in the workspace and earn in the same way that you could some years prior. We have to look after our future. Do not be short-sighted and encourage an employer or somebody who is engaging you to bypass the national insurance scheme so that you can get an extra $10 or $15 or $20 or $30 in your hand. That is short-sighted. So I'm encouraging all employed persons and all self-employed persons to be a part of the national insurance scheme. I'm also encouraging those who are employed to sign up with the National Insurance and Social Security Service portal so that you can check to make sure that your employer is submitting your national insurance deductions. The National Insurance and Social Security Service has an inspectorate that goes out, that does checks. But we have in Barbados thousands of employers. We will not be able to get to all of them. I'm encouraging our employees to check. Check behind your employer. Even if you have a great employer, check to make sure that your contributions are being submitted. And finally, to those who are self-employed, we've shared this in this honorable chamber before, but I need to remind and encourage. Self-employed persons now have a very easy way to submit and to be a part of the national insurance scheme. You can pay any amount at any time in any way that you want to pay. That is to say, you can go in and pay. You can pay on the portal. You can send a check. You can drop money, not money, drop a check in the drop box. There are many ways to pay. All that is required, where pension is concerned, is that you have at least $1,200 in the pot on an annual basis. But it is now very easy for self-employed persons to be a part of the Social Security system, the National Insurance Scheme. All of us, if we live long enough, we will get old. We will need that lifeline. And so we must understand that it is much more than a contribution. Much, much more than a contribution. It is truly a lifeline. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, this national policy on aging represents the ethos of this government, an ethos that values the humanity of all citizens, that recognizes that even as you age, you are still of worth and that you are still in need of protection, that you are still in need of sustenance. This government's ethos is also one that recognizes, just like we did in many things, from the time we came into office, we recognized the problem. We did something that governments do not like to do. We said we were going to default on our debt because we face our challenges. We face and we fix. With our National Insurance Department and scheme, we did the same thing. In this matter, this instant matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, we recognize that there is a looming issue with respect to how we deal with aging in our society. And it is not just about numbers. This is about human beings. This government has developed, after much consultation, this national policy. I encourage Barbadians to become, over time, familiar with at least the major tenets of the policy. I encourage Barbadians to recognize that time passes and we will all get there if we live long enough. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I support this national policy. I commend it to all Barbadians, and I offer my full support to this national policy in this debate. I'm obliged.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Members, sir, His Honour has returned, and therefore I will allow him to let us resume with his supervision.
Honourable Member St. Michael East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This debate is special to me for more than one reason. Probably because I also count the years before and after the present me. Sir, and I am very concerned about a policy that is named a policy on aging. Aging seems to suggest that the thinkers of the time are all victims of ageism. And ageism seemed to, in this context, seem to be impregnated with a divide between people of different age groups. And I really believe this practice and this concern was given birth from the divisiveness of history during our period of slavery, the divide and rule policy. Although much of us did not live beyond 45 years old. And we had a number of years without really being able to see people age that belongs to us. But I have a greater respect for the traditions of Africa. Where the traditions are very clear. Anytime a young man or young woman in the society is in the company of a senior person or the elders, that's the word that we normally use among the traditions in our culture, the elders, he never speak, sir, without asking permission. Never speak without asking permission to speak on whatever the private or public issue is, unless the elders approve. You'll be considered as rude. You can't be in the company of people, men and women, who are far older than you, and you just break the trends of the conversation and enter into the discussion, a human being that has little experience and in many cases less ability than those who are much older than you are. So you will hear us say, elders or elder, would you grant us permission to speak? Those courtesies do not exist in this culture at all. It does not exist in this culture. No, a young man will get up and interrupt a conversation. And I think when we're talking about policy, we also got to talk about philosophy. There might be 3 P's, there might be policy, philosophy, and programs. But we have to talk about a party having a philosophical position, especially in these times, where we do everything to make sure we respect each other regardless of age. I've heard the complaint all around Barbados as we walk around, not in these special environments of Parliament. When young men before and young women before walk through the communities and they see the elders with respect, they would never say an obscene word in front of the elders. They would never do anything that appear verbally or physically that can be perceived as disrespect to the elders. They would never do it to their senior teachers. And when we put policies in place, we have to put policies in place that is relevant to the time. So this policy also speaks to the way how we try to cultivate special characteristics in our children all across Barbados. We're experiencing difficulties, challenges in almost all institutions with all the creative thoughts, all the scientific judgment, and we're not doing as much as we ought to in order to try to identify what are the causes or the causalities of the problems that we're experiencing. So we tend to do the same thing over and over. Now, if you go the route of aging, and you also establish a barrier between aging and sickness, which is the mindset of even administrators, that as somebody get a certain age, they try to see if they can get them over to the geriatric hospital. They don't even want them to stay at the creche too long. Yeah, well, put me as an example for the sake of your comfort, right? But we have people in that institution which they go through mental shock when people tell them that you can't stay here any longer. And then they ask you, where are you taking me? And you say, the geriatric hospital. The last step after the geriatric hospital is the funeral home. No elderly person, no senior citizen likes to hear that. By the time as they get in the vehicle, whether it's the government, the institutional van that take you there or ordinary car, those people, what we call already half dead, they tell themselves, I am no longer useful in this society, not even my children don't want me. And I believe at the level of policy, this policy has to be shaped by understanding the dynamics or the logistics of what is happening in the lives of our elderly in Barbados. I like to come from the perspective that I highlighted, the Afrocentric perspective of the continent. I've seen it I have seen it work. I have seen it work not only in Africa, I've seen it work in Suriname. That when young people are behaving in a disorderly way, that they're taken to the elder in that community. Sometimes no university graduate, no secondary graduate, but she commands respect. Things, sir, that you can't get done, there's still some of the elders in this society that can resolve those problems. I have seen institutions when they're in crisis return to the elders. But if we operate with this view that they are useless because you condemn them on the basis that they are aging, I think we're on the wrong track, sir. So I would just like to see that the philosophy helps to guide the programs. Or not all of this that we're doing, the program is going to be the same. The programs are going to be the same regardless of how much policies we change, unless we explain to all those who are supposed to execute the programs that this is the way the government is thinking. It is always about transformation. It is always about transformation. How can we make things better for senior citizens across Barbados? They complain every day. Some of these people, every picture that they had of their grandmother and their great-grandmother, they throw in the bin. And they're talking about policies. Other people that don't look like us, if you go in their houses, you see pictures all around. This is my great-grandfather. This is my great-grandmother. These people don't even have a picture in their houses of their mothers or fathers. I know that is true. When I am fortunate enough to enter a house of people of different ethnic backgrounds, I can see the respect for the elders. And we don't only talk about the elders, we also talk about our ancestry. I'm talking about traditional thinkers of the principles that were laid down in the continent of Africa. I mind all the conversation about tribalism and all of that. We respect those things. Not this colonial society. It is not post-colonial, it is still a colonial society. People are still governed by models that were handed down to them, and the people who handed down the models don't respect the models in their own families. And that's what we're experiencing in Barbados. So I was talking recently to Rastafarian communities because of their interest in the subject matter of reparations and repatriation. And they express a fear as the community becomes older, so to speak. They express a fear that that same attitude, but it's likely to impact on them worse because of the change in culture. When a Rastafarian brother or sister reach a certain age, can't even get a chance to go to that same place that depicts sickness, called Yam's house. Sickness, not age. You can't get in there. The institutions that are responsible for the evaluation, they are not letting a Rastafarian in there. And they've been asking me, in the position which I have at present, they've been asking me if this government And to some extent, they believe that this government is a progressive government. And I would like to believe that too, sir. That if this government will work in collaboration with them and help it to provide an institution where when they reach that right age in society, that they know that they would not be fully jettisoned from among the environment of human civilization. With a little foresight, I believe that they're right. They have to take the precautionary measures, sir, to try to persuade government to consider them as we identify them as a special cultural group. You know, when we're here, we're talking about certain things, and we try to make it sound as though it's a conversation that is respecting humanity and things of that nature. We sound as though man, everything about man is so universal that everybody believes that when we talk about people, we include everybody. But I know when we talk about people in here and new facilities and new policy, we're talking about people that look like us. Because other people take care of themselves. They are not guided by this policy. They're not guided by their policy. You hardly ever see one of them in Becker's Road. You don't know when they're buried. You don't know where they're buried. So this parliament must be realistic. We are coming from a status where we were not even perceived as human beings. And now that we are here, we have to apply ourselves, not to the melody of conversation, but to in-depth and profound assessment of the society in which we live and how we treat our people, right down to the stage of death and even beyond, because we must also show respect to them even when they are in their graves. In other words, there must be pleasant memories that live on. So I am not going to give you any shopping list, sir, because I am helping and I'm also trying to explore what guidelines we ought to use in order to refine our national policy. I am not even objecting to what we have, but I believe that this government should have a policy for the government itself, that when we're dealing with issues of this kind, that we don't have to wait until we come here. We can engage in serious debate. So when you come here, a whole day, you need a whole day, sir, to discuss a policy of this kind away from Parliament. And then we can do the formal thing by coming to Parliament and then have a debate on it. It is not, you don't hold a meeting in the evening and invite people that aren't prepared to come and spend a little time socializing. Some who don't like the party and supported it, so they're twisting it and everything. But we are responsible for the policy that we are supposed to go in. And I believe that we need to sit down. I'm not asking to defer anything, because I don't even have the authority or the influence to do that. But I'm just saying that policies of this kind need a little more in-depth study as we go forward. And the language has to change. The language has to change. Before, in here, I was talking about the immigration and having words like imbecile on it. When they come in here, I said, you could ask. To me, I feel disrespectful. You're asking an ordinary man if this body is an imbecile for who and the imbecile that on for the immigration forms. I've seen all these things. It changed. But it changed because of debate, discussions. When we're having that ever since. You think because practice, you think that because you change something in 2006 or 2009, that the attitudes remains. When you change policies in here, when you go to the offices, that is responsible now for the execution again of the policy. Some of these people do not even listen to the debate or read anything from the official gazette, or even ever read a document related to the lives of the elders in this country. So you come back again, white paper, green paper, new policy. These things came to this House Assembly in my time. Fortunately for me, I am an old man. So I saw all of these. I went through all this green paper, white paper, everything, and the same thing remains. Same thing remains. Well, this is not a show. This is what happened at the Botanical Gardens. This is serious business related to the quality of life of our people at all different stages, and that we must create a form of governance so that from the cradle to the grave, we respect human lives. Some of the greatest philosophers in the world is all about 80 and 90 years old, and we read them every day. And they don't produce nursery rhymes. They don't get up everybody and say, I wrote a book last night and a narrative about the beach, or palm trees, or coconut trees, or canes. Deep thought. And that's what we need from a national policy. Senior citizens do not even share all of what you all call them, old people, because you seem to got an inseparable love for language that separates different social groups and different people of different age groups. They do not even want to share ideas with youth, because the way in which youth disrespect them. And they shape their thinking in that way because of people in senior positions showing the same attitude as here and here, you know. Showing the same attitude towards senior people. Are you up there debating, watching TV every night, looking at Donald Trump? You don't know. In your country, he should be out every Saturday. He should be out every Saturday in every part of the world. And you're looking at Biden, and then you're looking at a new movie star. And your situation is the same thing in the United States of America. Still living on the ghetto in a 4x6 spot. Can't even repatriate funding no more, because you're struggling to survive. So I believe that this policy needs, for me, a more extensive, serious debate, not how big the alternative hospital is going to be, or how the capacity is, then a discussion on policy. That's a serious discussion on policy. I didn't hear anything about any fundamental changes in the programs. So the minister speaks good. This minister sounds poetic. There's a melody in this tone, but no transformation. Because the authority must go beyond that. All of us must understand what it is we are trying to achieve. This is not an indictment on any minister. Sir, you're more in a position that is representative of a judge than I am. But it's not an indictment, because I believe that, I said before, and I said I believe that he's the best mind in here to apply his thoughts to things of this nature. But I don't believe that I am foolish enough to believe that he wrote everything that he got there in that document. I know permanent secretaries, all kind of people, deputy permanent secretary, all kind of consultants is coming to put a document before it, and you see it, some of you don't even read it. And you write approve. Or you got, there's some left, there's in the brain man. Nothing. All kind of things. And then this is go through. Next thing, it go on before cabinet. Every cabinet looks at it. Because you hear somebody like cabinet don't even look at these things. A member of parliament once said he wrote 2 books while in a cabinet meeting. These are things that you hear. So all I'm saying is that there are things that we can do that we're not doing. And there's probably a necessity for the change in the mechanism of governance, how we govern, how we shape national policy. I'm not talking about a small fraction or a small figment of somebody's imagination, and they just do a little note, a bare resolution to Parliament or character annual conference and all that kind of thing. A debate on how we treat our elderly people in this society is a debate that is massive and needs greater input, rather than be doing things and it then becomes part of a ceremonial exercise that we, at the end of the day, we will make no transformation. I say this because I was privileged before to be Minister of Social Transformation. We had long discussions. Recently, the Prime Minister introduced a model in which I thought I would have seen it happen more than once, sir. We were dealing with policy papers related to the same ministry. And in that effort, that template, blueprint, all these terms that should mean the same thing, members of even the opposition, who at the time were not in Parliament, were invited to participate. And I heard some great contributions, and the minister can testify to this, in that meeting. And one of the persons who spoke extensively on the policy at the time has deceased, but I know that he made a significant input. At times we had different views here, but he was very open-minded, and he expressed some of his concerns based on his intellect, and some of the other concerns came as a result of his experience as a minister. And I would like to believe that those ideas, other members were present at that meeting. And I thought that was something that was fresh, and that is something that I suggest that that's the way that we should go in the future. We don't have to come here and at least sometimes say things because we believe it is good only for the persons who give us full support. But this is a national policy. It need not have exclusively partisan input. And I thought at the time, I can't remember which constituency that the Honourable Mr. Lowe related to. I use that, sir, because I can't remember the constituency, and I ask pardon the circumstances. But I remember the representative from St. Thomas was also there. I was there. The former minister who represented Southeast was there. I think that we need to have policy papers before this Parliament after that extensive kind of assessment, so that people will learn. It is something that needs to be planted in the psyche of people early. Respect the elders. Don't use language that is derogatory in any way. Don't make senior people feel discomfort by your effort to reject them in the system. So we cut out the language. That's what we can do here. And we form philosophical concepts that help us to create a new society where out of that society, teachers can feel the benefits of the teachings coming from this government. Senior people can feel that this is an effort. We need to create a more civilized environment than the one that we have. And we don't have to judge civilization, as I said, based on any British model. We have elements that we can examine, and we can try to see how we can apply them. You might not get it done in a year or two, because the whole form of governance was fashioned for specific purposes. And that our presence here as senior people and as politicians must not be seen as exclusively dominant and exclusive of other people's opinion in shaping the national policy on how our civilization will continue to develop. I just want to make those few remarks, sir, and I hope that I have not exceeded the time that I was specifically should be allowed to speak. So thanks very much for making the short contribution.
Honourable St. Michael's office.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to lend my voice to this, what I consider very important debate, a resolution to address the national policy on aging. I believe that this particular policy has obviously come after very extensive consultations with various sectors in society. And I heard the last speaker, Honourable Member for St. Michael East, obviously raised a number of concerns in terms of levels of consultation. And I do agree that, you know, we have to continue to engage with stakeholders. But suffice to say, I think that this administration on coming to office recognized that just as we were trying to work in terms of getting the economy up and running, we also had to focus on a lot of these social issues. And I think immediately we were able to have committees established to be able to look at years of policies, years of data that had been written, that the same member for St. Michael East has served on several committees to weigh in on the issue of aging. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas also would have been a part of those committees, certainly as minister, but also even outside of being the minister, has played a very significant role, and I would want to certainly commend her for the work that she has done in imparting a lot of her knowledge in this area, not because of her age alone, but certainly because of her intimate knowledge as well in relation to dealing with elderly family members who've been affected by various conditions, various non-communicable diseases as well. And I think that we have benefited certainly as a party because of her wisdom, but also the ability to also tap into persons like the Honourable Member for St. James North, who has also played a significant role in working with persons with disabilities who are also elderly. I think this administration has demonstrated that we are keen on the consultations with the various stakeholders, keen on engaging people, whether they're parts of vulnerable groups, whether they are elderly, whether they are at-risk groups, to be able to get a better appreciation of how to inform policy. Now, I don't know if members have all had the opportunity to certainly weigh in on the document, but what struck me, as I think the Honourable Member for St. Michael East is raised, is the issue of, you know, sometimes we talk too much about these policies, and I think what we are all feeling at times is that the impact of the policy needs to be felt by the very people for whom we are trying to target. And so I totally can relate to that, because the first thing that I did when I looked at the policy was to look at what was the recommendation in terms of the action plan. Because without an action plan which clearly defines how we are going to execute all of what is in this document, at the end of the day, we all know that it is going to just sit on somebody's desk. It's going to be another piece of reference material that we are referring to over time. But the truth of the matter is, for all of us who represent constituencies, we all know the issues that elderly people are facing, and we also deal with our own personal issues with our families as well. So I wanted to start there, Mr. Speaker, because I don't want it to go out that there is not the level of consultation that has gone into this document, or that the Honourable Minister and his team, along with the Pan American Health Organization, have not consulted and over-consulted to some extent in terms of getting us here to being able to identify a number of the various areas that we believe as a government are important to our elderly population. And I say that because I think it's like the very first couple of pages speak to a few areas that I believe are drawn out in this policy that meet a lot of the concerns that we all have. The policy speaks to the issue of community care and the supporting social services. It speaks to health services and medical care, financial, social, and economic security, the treatment of elder abuse and related threats. I remember, Mr. Speaker, being in this place and hearing another administration speaking about an elder abuse policy, being able to deal with the issues of how, and many of you are nodding, being able to address the issues that were facing the elderly, where people were taking up their monies, cashing their pension checks, and not applying it back to our elderly people. This administration has, for the most part, stopped the talking and is moving towards the necessary legislation to be able to create a framework where those issues can be addressed. The resolution also, and the policy also speaks to the issues of the physical and the built environment. It speaks to the preparation for national disasters. Members will be well aware when we are facing a natural disaster, what happens is that a lot of us have to revert back to looking at our list of persons who are vulnerable in various communities, being able to ensure that we're able to get to them quickly with a view to being able to addressing a number of the issues they may have. Some of them may need medication, some of them the house roof may have blown off. The policy speaks to, again, at the crux of the matter, what some of the issues are that we have all encountered and that we have been able to weigh into this particular document. And then, of course, the issue of pandemics, because we never thought, I think, in our lifetime that we would experience a pandemic, and we would have to, as a country, have to now learn how to deal with these types of situations where our elderly population cannot now interface in the way that they did before, but that we now have to prepare, in a sense, in the event that there's another eventuality such as a pandemic. The document speaks to the overall framework of how we as a government certainly address these matters. And then, of course, there's the legislation for protecting and supporting the elderly, which again, as I said, we've started the process of being able to address the elder abuse issues. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't want us to leave here with a misunderstanding of what this document says, but also that this document sets the framework, the context for what all of us have expressed over time in the various stakeholders and through many of the different persons who have drafted all kinds of policies prior to this and kept them in draft and never moved them to action, that this policy document encapsulates all of those things. But what we must now move to is addressing in a very granular way the issues of the implementation of this particular policy. Now, Mr. Speaker, I remember when I was growing up, doesn't seem that long ago, I wanted to get older. I wanted, being an adult seemed to be something that was attractive. It seemed to be something that we all wanted to do. You want to, do the things that adults do. And it was also, you don't want people telling you what you should do and what you should wear and how you should do it. And the concept of being an adult seemed an exciting one. I have said over and over that the problem that we have is nobody tells you the harsh reality about adulting. And that adulting comes with it certain levels of responsibility. Responsibility, not only your own personal responsibility, but also the responsibility to others, and it also comes with responsibility to your parents and those who are part of your dependents and your supporting households. So while I like the idea of getting old, I would want that as part of this policy and as part of this action plan, that one of the things that we help to do in terms of turning the corner is really to start to speak more to our young people about their responsibilities as young persons in relation to how they support the elderly population. I've heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South repeatedly speak to this issue in relation to the challenges that we are seeing in the society, where a lot of our elderly people are being abandoned. I grew up in a generation, certainly, where I cannot even think of abandoning my elderly father or my mother, for that matter, or any of the elderly people that I certainly support. It was something that was ingrained in you from the youngest age, where you were required to honor your father and your mother. You were supposed to respect your neighbors. You were supposed to respect the elderly. You were supposed to be courteous. You were supposed to open doors. If somebody needed a seat, you were supposed to stand up and allow them to sit down if they were older than you. And I think that we have to get back to speaking of those things and also teaching those things and teaching them within our communities, creating opportunities where young people certainly can appreciate that they too will get older, that they too will have to cater and to create avenues for being able to look after their elderly, because it certainly hurts me when I encounter people who have aged, have contributed to society, are not in a position to be able to look after themselves. But then their children are also not catering and looking after them. One of the issues that often comes up, which I believe this policy has to root out, is the issue of persons who choose to look after an elderly person, but because of their work, they are not able to give the time and the support that they would want to give because they are too busy being employed in and trying to keep their job or keep the little pick in order to be able to continue working. And I think we have to address this, because many times the best support can come from certainly within the household. But many people would want the option to be able to stay at home, to be able to care for that loved person, but they are unable to do so because they are too busy trying to make ends meet. And I think that any policy going forward in terms of our action plan has to look at a way perhaps to be able to provide that support for someone who is desirous of staying at home to care for someone who may be bedridden or who may need the day-to-day support. And that is something that I believe the action plan would be able to flesh out a bit better, in the hope then that we may be able to have some, whether it's budgetary proposals being put on the table, so that at the appropriate time we may be able to offer some kind of support for those individuals. Now, that is not supposed to say that people are supposed to stop working in their other substantive jobs and only look after elderly people. But I speak in this way because this is becoming our reality, that elderly people sometimes prefer their next of kin, their own family members to be able to look after them. And there are some people out there who are willing to do so, but they do not have the financial support to be able to do that. Now, the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, is that I feel that apart from the education and desensitization, we speak of active aging. We speak of keeping people engaged. But the reality is that, it's good to say that people should remain active, or that people should not only engage in healthy lifestyles, but I think that part of the action plan must also be changing the mindset of us just having a week of activities talking about healthy lifestyles, or a day of activities just talking about healthy lifestyles. I commend, I believe it was the National Assistance Board recently, for the activities with the seniors just before the children went back to school. I would love to see those types of activities increasing across communities, where active lifestyles, healthy living becomes a way of life for our elderly. There are certain challenges that elderly people sometimes have in getting to these activities, and maybe we have to dig a little deeper and look at how we provide transportation for people who are interested in getting to and fro, understanding all the attendant issues in terms of nursing care, the fact that people may have to take medications and they have different requirements. Because if we understand what the aging process is about, then any policy that is to be brought to life must take into account that people may want to go to a community center to engage in health checks. But if legs may be so bad, the knees may be so bad that they can't walk up the road to get to the community center. And therefore, we may have to look at encouraging persons to be able to participate in programs where they can transport and provide the mobility that is necessary for persons to engage in those activities. It may just require a little bit more thinking through of how we do it, but if we can engage persons to come to a political meeting and we can mobilize for that, My view is that we can also mobilize to ensure that people are able to look after their basic healthcare needs as well, by being able to provide that level of mobilization and support for them to be able to go to particular places where these checks are happening. So I think part of telling people about what they must do also requires that as also persons who are part of the directorate, that we are also eating healthy, we are active, that we lead by the example of showing people what it is that you ought to do. Many people say, eating healthy is expensive. And, I don't eat meat. I'm a pescatarian, I only eat fish. But I can tell you it is not as expensive as people may think it is. It just depends on what you choose to eat and the quantities. I have also been able to see with my own father, he's now 83, but I've been able to change his diet. Not because I have taken away all the pigtails and all the things that my father doesn't like to eat, but it has come over a period of time of introducing him to different fruits, different vegetables, making sure that there's salad available, and giving him smaller portions, because within our society, we believe that if the plate is not piled high, that we have not had a full and proper meal. And these are the things that in terms of public sensitization, are and must be ingrained in how we are able to execute any policy for the aging population. We cannot tell people that they must do things, but then we ourselves are lining up for the pudding and sauce, or the pigtails, or the greasy foods, when we know full well, or the fast food restaurants, as some on the backbench like to indulge in. I will call no names, but these are our realities. We all like to take a little something that we probably shouldn't from time to time, and I believe that there's such a thing as moderation. But equally, if we're going to speak in terms of a national nutrition policy for our children, the national nutrition policy has to also include our elderly population, and it has to be such that if you're telling the children that they mustn't eat certain things, then you also need to be targeting the adults so that they're not buying the things that the children ought not to be eating. Because it's okay to captivate them within the school environment and ban certain foods, but the wider population, the aging population, must also be the beneficiary and certainly the recipients of the knowledge and the understanding of how to prepare healthy foods, how to engage in a healthy lifestyle as well. And I would say, I recently bought my dad what I call a recumbent bike, and I'll tell you why. I bought it because I knew he couldn't handle the other types of stationary bikes because he would have to mount himself onto the bike. But I got him a recumbent bike because I recognized that what he would love to do every day is to watch CNN or MSNBC to see what is happening in the US elections. He'll sit on the telephone and he'll talk to everybody, and everybody across Barbados, my father will speak to, about what is happening in the island. But what I realized is that he was not active. And by not being active, there's an impact in terms of his circulation. And in turn, that can lead to challenges in terms of his health and his healthy lifestyle. So what we did is we got the bike, and we were able to allow him to watch television, to talk on the telephone, but he's now riding and moving his legs and remaining active. I think part of this action plan must look at the types of pieces of equipment, whether it is gym equipment, whether it is recumbent bikes, where people can remain in place or they can go to other facilities to be able to take advantage of being able to exercise. I have certainly seen the transition in my father's health as a result of taking a little extra money and being able to say, I am not buying you pigtails, I am not buying you all of the things that you would like to eat, but I'm going to put the resources towards buying you something which I believe is going to give you a little longer life on this earth as well. So diet is important, and I think we have to encourage our people to cut back on sugars. There are way too many non-communicable diseases that are impacting our entire society, and it's starting obviously from childhood ages, and we need to be able to nip this in the bud with a series of public education programs designed to target the society. It must no longer be that we see a week of activities as where we give up something, but rather that this is ingrained in us, that every single day we must strive to be able to ensure that we eat the correct things. And therefore, in the same way that you have social media, obviously, being utilized by many of our elderly population, we have to find creative ways to reach them as well, because everybody's not listening to the radio, they're not watching the television stations. We need to be able to find creative ways within our communities to be able to get the message over to our society. Community centers, as I said, need to become more focal points. The Ministry of People's Empowerment has started the process of decentralizing services in terms of social services. And I believe that that is a step in the right direction because, again, a lot of our elderly people, I think we are mindful that many of them are not able to, because of mobility issues, sometimes it is easier to get to the community center than it may be to get to the welfare department or whatever in these city areas. And so I think we have recognized that decentralization provides better support systems. What I think we must caution ourselves on is making sure that the support that is given to those particular satellite agencies is a support system that is able to allow them to be responsive. Because if they are not able to respond to the concerns that persons have who are elderly, or generally in terms of social care services, then we are only seeking to frustrate the elderly population even more. So it's like the service is coming to you now, but you are still not getting the level of service and the understanding that is needed in order to deal with that segment of the population. And I think that is something that the action plan must look at. How can we provide that support to persons where we are responsive, where we are understanding and empathetic of what elderly people must deal with. I think we also need to look at the whole issue of the health care. And Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. I can't have this discussion on the elderly without acknowledging a number of the phone calls, a number of the people that I visit who complain of still, regardless of all of the expenditure that we have made in relation to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and our polyclinics, and I thank the Honourable Member for speaking to that earlier in terms of putting things in perspective. That is all well and good. But one of the things that makes a difference for many people is how they are treated when they go to a healthcare facility or when they go to any healthcare facility. You could be feeling at your worst, but if we engage and embark on a program to ensure that we are empathetic, that we talk to people when they come in, you say to the little old lady, ma'am, do you want to sit down? Let me find a chair for you to sit in. Have you had anything to drink? Making provision that if people want to bring a tea bag so that they can get a cup of hot water, that we understand that we are dealing with an elderly population that may leave home wanting to get a particular service, wanting to get health care, but they are unable to do so or stay the length of time that they would like because they haven't had something warm in their stomach. And I'm not saying that we now create a school meal service or a meal service for people visiting the hospital. I'm saying that as any other developed country does, we must pay attention to the fact that when our elderly visit some of these institutions, they are doing so with nothing in their stomachs. And just the comment or the concern being expressed to them as to, have you had a meal? Have you had something warm to drink? How are you feeling today? These are basic things that we have all been taught, but in many cases we've lost it because of the stressors of life and perhaps we just don't care anymore. But these are the things that when we are talking about an action plan, we have to seriously think about. How do we train the people who are interfacing with persons in our healthcare institutions, who are interfacing with people who are elderly people who are being provided a service? How do we treat to these issues with a level of sensitivity that says to that person, it doesn't matter how you are feeling today, we got you. We understand what you're going through. And you will see, Mr. Speaker, what a difference it makes in terms of the engagement with persons, not just the elderly, but people generally, when people take the time to meet people where they are and to understand what they are going through. One of the other issues, Mr. Speaker, that I think that this action plan, which emerges from this policy document, will also have to address is also the issue of how we treat to palliative care. I encounter several people who go through whether it's cancer treatment or other treatment. And as a result of the changes to their body, the changes to their diet, many people are uncertain as to how to deal with that stage of their life. They're told they have stage 4 cancer, and in a sense, sometimes they're left to go home to die. They're not given sometimes the information that is necessary to be able to guide them through that very difficult stage of their lives with a level of understanding that is required at that point in their lives to understand what they must now do. And I encounter too many people, Mr. Speaker, where this is happening. And I feel that part of our action plan must be to ensure that even within our healthcare institutions, that when people receive certain diagnoses, that you give them something which helps them to understand what they are going through. Because many times when you tell them face to face, because they are dealing with the shock sometimes, or not appreciating the full extent of their condition, many of them don't digest what is being said to them in a consultation. And we must now get to a point where we create opportunities where people can either call back a number to be able to ask questions about their health, or that our support services are strengthened where some of these questions can be answered, whether in person or whether we make a phone call to be able to allow people to have somebody to talk to. Mr. Speaker, I encounter many elderly people who are also dealing with issues of mental health. They're dealing with, just as we talk about young people dealing with issues of mental health, coming out of COVID, there are more and more individuals who, because of the lockdown, who because of being confined to spaces that they were not accustomed to spending so much time, they are finding it difficult getting back out and resuming normal activity. We need to pay attention to this in relation to any action plan that comes out of this policy. We also need to deal with the issue of long COVID, because many people who have had COVID-19 during the pandemic are also suffering other consequences in terms of their breathing, in terms of other illnesses that have arisen as a result of having contracted the COVID-19 virus. So any policy must address, yes, the pandemic, but it must also, even before we get to a wide-scale approach, it must start to look at the fact that we need support systems to help to carry some of our aging population, where people can talk to persons and to express how they feel. Sometimes the simplest thing I find in my constituency is that elderly people say, "Ma'am, I would like MCTV put in." Why? Because they have nobody to talk to. Nobody may be visiting them on a regular basis. Sometimes what they need is a little transistor radio so that they can listen to the radio as well. These are the things that become the company of our elderly, and particularly those who are confined because they don't have the communication and the family circle to be able to support them. Those are the elderly care policies that we need to look at. We've implemented the system of having elderly care within the communities, and I think that is to be applauded by this administration. Again, it didn't take a policy for this administration to determine that, especially coming out of the pandemic, that we needed to make sure that our elderly people were taken care of, that somebody is able to sit with them, to be able to help to identify if they're having challenges. Mr. Speaker, it took no policy paper for this administration to recognize that it had to be responsive. It didn't take a pandemic alone for us to recognize that if a pandemic or any emergency arises, that we must provide care packages specific for the elderly. No document is going to guide us alone as to what we do. But I think what is coming out of this document is that there are some things that are low-hanging fruits that we must address almost immediately, because we are seeing the decline in a lot of our elderly people. And there are some things that are going to be more long-term. It also means, Mr. Speaker, that we have to deal with this issue of the silos, because a lot of times agencies try to operate in isolation, when in truth and in fact, some of these matters relating to our elderly population require us to work together. And again, that sensitization is important, that our public officers or heads of institutions understand and appreciate that we are all in this together. An elderly person who has an issue, as I raised with the Honourable Minister this morning, who has an issue where there is neglect, may also have an issue which relates to housing. And we have to be, nimble enough to understand that all of the agencies that are able to assist will have to directly jump in and to assist. And I believe that's why we also set up things like the resilience unit, because it is not a unit, to the best of my understanding, for only young people. It also addresses our elderly population, who may also require an intervention. And I think that this again speaks to the fact that we have not waited until something has happened or until a policy paper was completed to be able to act, Mr. Speaker. But I also want to speak about directly, quickly, my own ministry, because we speak to this policy in relation to the built environment, the physical environment. And I know that we've embarked on fixing roads and potholes, which I know many of our elderly people and the wider population have benefited from. But we've also done an aggressive program in terms of the cart roads, the community roads, where we recognize that many of our elderly, when they get off of a van or a bus, they have to walk through what we consider to be a cart road to their houses. And we've sought to improve the conditions of the roads as persons are going from the main road into their particular household. So we have done our part as well at the ministry, in addition to working with people, the disabilities unit, and the Honourable head of the commission, to be able to look at parking spaces, making sure that our elderly people as well as persons with disabilities are better catered for in terms of being able to find parking spaces in town. Mr. Speaker, we've looked at the issue of street lighting. In many of the areas where we have are improving the street lighting is where we have also improved roads. So a number of the highways where people might have to traverse to get a bus to get to another location, or they want to walk on an evening, we have determined as a policy that we are working with the Barbados Light and Power to improve the lighting. Areas like Highway 2A, recently, we've had several complaints about Highway 2A in terms of the lighting. And what we've done when we recently came back from the People's Republic of China is we were able to negotiate an additional donation of solar lights and poles to be able to assist us in the next few months to be able to light that entire stretch of the highway. These are the things that we do because we understand that those particular stretches, while they are difficult for vehicular traffic to traverse, also lend themselves for the elderly being able to walk along the road to be able to exercise as well. So the mission is one where, as we improve an area which has poor road conditions, there is also the intention of the ministry to ensure that we are also upgrading as well the lighting in various communities. Now the list is long. We came to office and just like the roads, we had issues in terms of street lighting, where monies had not been paid to the Barbados Light and Power for a while, and the monies were mounting up. And we've been able over time to be able to bring down those sums with a view to being able to keep current so that we can submit our list to the Barbados Light and Power with a view to having them address areas in critical areas. Obviously, priority being able to be given to the areas where we know that there's a lot of criminal activity, and then being able to work through to light communities as well, where people obviously reside. We've simplified the process for seniors with the driving licenses, and that was working in collaboration with the Barbados Association of Retired Persons. So it wasn't done in isolation. We've been able to ensure that by changing the legislation, every 2 years for the seniors between age 75 to 85, they must apply, and persons 85 and older, that they're required to provide their medical certificates annually in order to retain their driver's license. So we've listened. We didn't need a policy paper or an action plan to recognize that there were basic things that we needed to do. And the truth is, Mr. Speaker, many of the debates on the elderly over the years have revolved around increases in the non-contributory pensions. That's where it has revolved around. It hasn't revolved around meaningful actions being taken to address the concerns of our elderly population. Now, Mr. Speaker, I, like the Honourable Member for St. Peter, and I believe the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, and I'm sure, and several others in this chamber, has also been impacted by the aging process within my own family. My mom developed the disease of Alzheimer's and is currently in a nursing home. And I therefore understand firsthand the challenges that people face, not only in making decisions in relation to the care of an elderly person who is close to you, but also being able to provide what I consider the necessary support while that person is within an institution. So yes, we talk about building out the geriatric hospital. Yes, we talk about improving healthcare at the district hospitals. But there's a harsh reality that many people face. There is right now more demand for these institutions than we can provide. And we must face that frontally. Because you have many people who, when we were growing up, you would hear the person had gone, that old person crazy. Luckily, with education, we have come to understand that there are conditions that exist. There are also treatments for those conditions. We have been sensitized to the point now where we understand that as a government, we have a responsibility not just to talk about these things glibly, but we must put efforts together to make sure that we are able to address these things so that people who are hearing that there's a geriatric hospital, who knows that they are aging, that they have an option, that they can go into that institution, or that there are other facilities providing elderly care that does not allow them to have to remain on their own and at the mercy of people trying to rob them blind. Mr. Speaker, that is what this administration is there to do. I have a view, and I've expressed it to my colleagues, and I hope that at some point we have the resources to be able to do it. But I believe that we also have to look at elderly facilities within the communities, not elderly facilities created by the private sector. There are many people in communities who presently look after elderly people. There are many people who do an excellent job in looking after elderly people. But you know what they may need? They may need the financial support to retrofit their homes to be able to take in not just the little old lady next door whose whose young adult is going out to work and can't be there with them during the day, but they may need the financial support by way of some kind of grant or loan to be able to retrofit their homes, to be able to care for people within communities. And there are several models outside of Barbados where these types of models can work. But we must understand that elderly people don't like to leave their home. Even families who are close to their elderly don't like them to leave. I could never have imagined a day where I could have had to place my mother in a home. But when I came back from Miami and I was going through my recovery, I had to make a decision. And we sat as a family and we made a decision. It was either I had to put myself in order because her condition is going to deteriorate, or I'm going to deteriorate with her. And these are the life-changing decisions that people out there must make. I am thankful that I'm in a better position to make that type of decision. But I can't come here today and don't speak for the people who don't have the financial resources to do that type of intervention. Because they're the people who sent me here as well. And we must accelerate a program which allows people who are interested, who meet a certain criteria. Because you can't just open up a facility in your house and decide you can take in people. You must have a regulated system for people within communities to be able to look after the elderly. I get bombarded, and I pass on the request to the minister from people who are interested in providing this service. But what it just needs is the regulation to be able to allow us to have the retrofitting, make sure that they maybe have a ramp, make sure that they have a wheelchair access, make sure that they have grip bars, make sure that they have the necessary things where they're checking the medication and they're administering whatever it is to be done correctly, Mr. Speaker. But I do not accept that we can build facilities as a government to cater for all of the needs of our elderly population in Barbados, especially the people who are most vulnerable. It is a policy that, and a philosophy that we must come to understand that there are some people that we must always cater for and we must always look after. And before I sit, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak briefly to housing, because while this administration has tried to accelerate the whole issue of housing, the fact that I have one of the largest housing areas in this country allows me to speak with some authority as it relates to the direction we must now go as a country and as a government in relation to, in particular, low-income housing. As I said before, there are some people we will always have to carry. There are some people we're going to have to provide housing for. And when it relates to our elderly population, I'm seeing people who live in the upstairs and downstairs units unable now to be able to climb the stairs, because anybody who goes into a housing unit knows that the stairs about so big. And when you put one foot on the stairs, half the back of your foot falling off. These are the realities of our elderly population. So we can't come here and have a static debate about a policy. Honourable Member for St. Michael East, I agree with you. We need to talk about the issues that are affecting our people, because those people who live in those units who now cannot go upstairs are not able to occupy the top floor of their accommodation, and their bathroom is downstairs. They have now retrofitted, for want of a better word, their living room into a bedroom. So from the time you get to the door, you're in the bedroom of the elderly person. The young people may be upstairs if they're lucky that they're looking after them, but the elderly person is now trying to find a single bed that can fit in a housing unit. Mr. Speaker, these are the things we must confront, because more and more of our elderly are requesting the single bed to be able to put into the front room, or to be able to retrofit their spaces to be able to allow them to live comfortably in their space. We can allow people to remain in place, but we need to start to think about and to empathize with them as to the conditions that they're in. Now, the truth of the matter is we've started the projects in terms of being able to ease the densely populated communities, and my elderly people in St. Michael's office will benefit, as will others. But there is a reality that the Ministry of Housing has been working on doing these surveys because data must drive decision-making, to look at the elderly population, to look at the young people, to look at who can afford the types of housings that they will go on to create. And this data is important to drive that decision-making, because, Mr. Speaker, if we are not careful, we will end up building or constructing houses that our elderly may not be able to be catered for. So just as persons with disabilities are catered for, it is important that that data that the Ministry of Housing is doing is used to inform the decision-making as to what do we build, what can people afford, what can't people afford. Because I have some units in the Pine in Harborview that were built as bachelor quarters. You're well aware, Minister. And I must tell you, these spaces, we need to revisit these spaces, because what may have obtained in the 1960s is not fit for purpose for 2024 with an aging population. I don't need statistics to tell you what I see on a day-to-day basis. We need a policy through housing where many of those housing units can be retrofitted. Some of them need to knock down altogether, but where they can be retrofitted, where perhaps you knock into the next block, the next apartment, and you enlarge the space so people can be comfortable. Where you maybe create a space where a person can be there to manage the old people. Where a space can be created where they can come out of their houses and go across into a room and they can recreate, Mr. Speaker. These are the things that an action plan must envisage. Because if it doesn't, then this just becomes another glossy document that will sit on a shelf, but will not be brought to life. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm mindful of the time, but I think it would be remiss of me if I did not speak to this last issue. How we treat to our elderly is critical. And I can tell you that whether it is in terms of how we deliver services or how we treat to people, even at the level of politics, it is important that we treat the people with a level of respect, but in particular to the elderly people upon whose backs many of us are here today. And I saw in the last few weeks a display by a political party in relation to its elderly, asking people who I came into this Senate as a young woman who would sit in the public gallery and support the policies of the then administration, whether her name was on the list or not. I saw people who I have personally worked with, Mr. Speaker, also who have been at the forefront of supporting the opposition party for years, for decades, toiling in the sun, creating all kinds of programs, running about behind everybody, sir. And I'm telling you, not just as a female, Mr. Speaker, but as a politician, as one who has respect for the people upon whose backs I climb upon to get where I am. It don't matter whether the person is on the other side or not. There are certain things that we must denounce as political parties, as politicians, when we see it in politics. And the way that I saw, I mean, there were several people who were treated badly. But I want to talk about the elderly. Because for me, when I look within even the Barbados Labour Party, there are people who, and I won't call the names, my colleagues and those who come to the meetings know who they are. There are people who built the Barbados Labour Party, who when you see them, you see Barbados Labour Party. You see the blood, sweat, and tears of people who walked and toiled and canvassed and worked for us and for our predecessors to get where they are, Mr. Speaker. And we must never allow or be silent in this Parliament or any other place when we see them treated in a particular way. It is wrong, it is wrong, it is wrong. And whether we agree on either side with the policies of any particular individual, we must be able to stand firm and call out wrongdoing. It doesn't set the right example for our younger generation, and it doesn't set the right example for elderly people who have served at the highest level and who have been on the front line as the soldiers on the ground promoting a political party. And I tell you, I sat in my living room and watched the videos coming in and felt hurt to see how women were treated, how individuals were treated who had toiled in a particular way for the opposition party. And I think today is the place that it needs to be said, because it is in this Parliament that it must be said. It is in this Parliament that we've fought for the rights of not just women, but we've fought for the rights of the elderly. And it must be said here, Mr. Speaker, and it must never become the norm in our society or in any political party. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to end there because I feel very strongly that what we have here encapsulates a lot of what has been discussed for many years. I am not a fan of documents. I believe in action. I believe that we now need to bring this action committee to embark on its journey to being able to get things done, and that we must do so with short-term measures, medium-term measures, and long-term measures to be able to get us where we need to. But the statistics are clear in terms of what this country will face in another couple of years in relation to our elderly population, and I think it would be unwise of us to ignore it. We've already done the amendments in terms of our national insurance, recognizing what lies ahead. There are many people who've been critical of what we did as a government. But the reality is that this administration will always be accused of looking down the road to see how we make life better for all Barbadians. If that is the one thing we are to be accused of, Mr. Speaker, let us be accused of that. But the one thing we will not do is to retire from politics and know that we could have done something to change the current trajectory for our elderly population or even to transform this society, and we sit and we do nothing. And we just create more documents and we create more papers and more policy documents, but we do not start the process of the transformation that is needed in our society. So I want to commend the Honourable Minister and his entire team. I invite you as well to look at what is happening in the the facilities for private care as well, because especially coming out of COVID, you have a situation where a number of the activities have not necessarily resumed, which would certainly allow for the physical activity that is necessary for our elderly. And I think that's something that we need to look at across the board. People are still very concerned about going into homes and engaging in activities that would certainly benefit the elderly. And I think we need to really pause and to look at what types of programs that we can institute in a lot of these institutions across the board, both private and public, to be able to allow our elderly people to feel wanted and to certainly feel a part of our society. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I'm obliged. Mr. Speaker, I beg
Honourable Leader
to...
of Government Business. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:45 p.m.
Question that is Honourable Chairman be suspended until 2:45 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say no. The meeting, the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:45 p.m.